So the 9 new Bitcoin spot ETFs that launched trading in America in January have absolutely exceeded all expectations, and they even contributed to doubling the price of Bitcoin over the past couple of months. But let's not forget, there's another 200 countries all around the world who control a lot of wealth around the world, and they are all now frantically scrambling to launch their own Bitcoin spot ETFs. So today we're going to look at the nation state FOMO that is going on in the ETF space and compare that to the amount of capital that we've seen flood in via these US centric Bitcoin spot ETFs. So this here is actually looking at the amount of wealth that's held by each respective country all around the world. And it highlights that America right now does control the most amount of wealth in the world. We can see here that America controls $105 trillion worth of wealth. So this is to be expected, okay? America is the global reserve currency. They've held that title for the past 100 years, and it is natural that they do have the most amount of wealth in the world, okay? The US Treasury note, that's kind of been used as a quote-unquote, reserve asset over the past 50 years, okay? Since the 1970s, US treasuries have essentially become that money-like instrument around the world. They are the quote-unquote global reserve asset, okay? Countries have needed to actually pay for oil in US dollars. So it's natural that we do see the most amount of wealth in America. But we can also see here, there is more countries around the world that do hold a lot of wealth. China, $63 trillion worth of wealth in China, okay? They have one of the largest property markets around the world. I believe the exact figures are something like 70% of all of the wealth in China is stored in the property market. So again, that's massive. But again, there's other countries around here who do hold significant amounts of wealth. Japan, 25 trillion. India, 12 trillion. The UK, 14 trillion. Canada, 8 trillion. Okay. So again, when we're talking about these Bitcoin ETF flows, I think it's important to be cognizant of what's going on all around the world, because America is not the only market that can bring a significant amount of capital into the Bitcoin space. And I think this is even more important to consider when we look at what these US spot ETFs have done to the Bitcoin price. It has surprised everybody to the upside. And now that we have Hong Kong, as well as a few other countries around the world actively racing to get Bitcoin spot ETFs approved, we need to be paying attention to what is happening in these other markets. So this here is again another really cool little website. So this is again from the Visual Capitalist, and we can see it's comparing the amount of capital held in the different nations and the different stock markets around the world. So this here is the S&P 500, and we can see that it is worth $36 trillion, which again is huge and it's massive. But let's not forget, other countries around the world control a significant amount of money. So we can see we're comparing the US GDP versus the Chinese GDP. They're pretty equivalent. They both have about $20 trillion worth of economic power that is essentially produced in their country every year. And also, let's not forget the central bank balance sheets around the world. This is important when we, kind of think about what's happening in Switzerland. I think it's the Swiss central bank is actually the one out there purchasing stocks for their balance sheet. They're trying to artificially weaken their currency because it's too strong. It's pretty wild to think about. But what happens? Will they start allocating to Bitcoin spot ETFs? I don't know, but it's important to kind of think about, hey, there's all these other central banks around the world who control a lot of money. So we can see the top 4 central banks control $28 trillion of capital. We can see that the ECB actually controls more capital than the US Fed, which is pretty crazy to think about. But now that we're talking about these kind of, spot ETF race, I want to show you this really cool chart that I found here. Because since the Bitcoin spot ETFs have been live, they've captured 83% of the entire ETF market. Okay, think about that for a minute. That's absolutely wild to think about. We can see that there are Bitcoin spot ETFs approved in Europe. We also have a couple of other countries here on the list. We do have my ex-home country, Australia, on the list. Right now, they have about $33 million of capital locked into their Bitcoin spot ETF product that they've had for a little while now. Okay. Now, again, this chart was as of February 15th. So right now, the US market would probably capture higher than 90% of the entire global market. So we can see the primary markets right now that have been approved. Okay, we're not talking about Hong Kong and the other countries who are actively racing to get their ETFs approved, but we can see the primary markets are US, the EU, Canada. Okay, and there's smaller products in Brazil and Australia, but there are also products in Germany and tax havens such as Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Jersey, and Bermuda. Okay, very interesting. Especially Liechtenstein. That's a country that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. I believe you can actually pay for your taxes in the country, and the country was also rumored to be considering allocating some of their treasury into Bitcoin. Again, just rumors, but they were the rumors that were circulating in the country. And they did make that official announcement where they said, look, you can pay some of your Bitcoin for your taxes. Okay, so that's all, no speculation there. But there were obviously extra rumors floating around about you might being able to actually pay for goods and services in the country if they add it to the balance sheet and make it legal tender. But let's go back to this chart here because I think it's fascinating. Because we can see Canada has about $3 billion of capital locked into their Bitcoin spot ETFs. Now, again, this is kind of like, it's very important to highlight, the race that goes on in these spot ETFs. Because Canada here, they nearly have more capital in their ETFs than places like Germany, Liechtenstein, and all of the ETFs in Europe combined do. The reason for that was because Canada was first to the punch. Canada got their ETF approved in the last bull market. So it's always important to try to get your ETFs approved faster than all of your other competing nations, which is why Hong Kong right now is actively racing to get their ETF approved as soon as possible. And this is going to open up the capital from China into the Hong Kong market. Everybody knows that whatever Hong Kong does, they have to get their blessings from Beijing first, okay? In a recent video we were looking at how Hong Kong wanted to become, in their own words, a global crypto hub. But first, before doing that, they had to get the sign-off from the CCP in Beijing, okay? And we know that they do have Beijing's blessing. That's a direct quote from a Bloomberg article. Hong Kong has Beijing's blessing to become this global crypto hub. So again, what's going to happen when Hong Kong starts plowing capital into Bitcoin? Because again, Hong Kong is a proxy for China. China controls about $60 trillion of wealth in the world today. That's a lot of money. They're the second wealthiest country in the world. And as soon as Hong Kong gets that ETF approved, that's pretty bullish for Bitcoin. That's incredibly bullish for Bitcoin. Okay. But let's go back to this CoinGecko chart and little article. I think it's really interesting how quickly the US has overtaken Canada, despite Canada having its ETF approved and in the market for at least the past 3 years. Okay, a lot of people were kind of bearish on the US ETFs because they were saying, look, there can't be that much capital coming into the US Bitcoin spot ETFs because the Canadian ETFs have been live for 3 years and they've only got $3 billion of capital in them. Why is the US spot ETFs going to be any different? But of course, we know that things have been very different because of the amount of money that has flown into these top products in America. So we can see how much capital is in these products. GBTC still has a lot of money locked into it. And obviously we know that BlackRock is the winner right now in the Bitcoin spot ETF race that we have seen going on. Okay, so now let's head back on over here to the this website that visualizes all of the money in the world. And I want to make a couple of other very interesting points. So we can see here, this is this tiny little block here called cryptocurrency, showing you how much money right now is in the total Bitcoin and crypto market. So right now there's less than $3 trillion inside it. Okay, so it's a tiny market. It is absolutely tiny. And when you have a look at all of the other capital in the world that has the potential to allocate some percentage into Bitcoin, it kind of shows us that we are very, very early on in Bitcoin's life. Have a look at the money in the S&P 500. $36 trillion just in the S&P 500 index in America. Okay, it's crazy. There's a lot of money out there that could be allocated to Bitcoin. And this is just US stock markets. When we start having a look at the global money supply, we can see there's a massive amount of money. There's $80 trillion in broad money. There's $40 trillion in narrow money sitting on central bank balance sheets. And then you can start having a look at the global indexes. So again, right now, we only really have this the top two boxes on screen right now allocating to Bitcoin. Okay, so that is kind of like the NASDAQ and the NYSE. Okay, these are the US capital markets. Okay, but what happens when some capital in the Shanghai stock market and the Euro stock market and the Japanese stock market can now begin to allocate to Bitcoin spot ETFs if those ETFs are launched in those respective countries? Okay, now have a look at this massive box here at the bottom. This is actually it's titled Other. So this is all of the money in all of the other stock markets that is actually not big enough to be included overall. But we can see there's a lot of money in it. Okay, the money in the other box is even larger than what's in the NASDAQ. So again, this is from countries all around the world, and many of these countries don't yet have Bitcoin spot ETFs approved in their countries. Okay, again, absolutely everybody underestimated the flows of the Bitcoin spot ETFs. We can see from this headline here that JP Morgan just recently announced that they now expect the first yearly flows for Bitcoin to be around $62 billion. Now, this is obviously a lot more than what was initially estimated by a lot of these Bitcoin ETF gurus, okay? We know that one of the most bullish banks around the world and one of the most bullish estimates we got for the spot ETFs was from Standard Chartered Bank. So Standard Chartered Bank came out and they said, look, we think that, the Bitcoin spot ETFs could get somewhere around, 50 to $100 billion of capital in their first years. And most people called them absolutely crazy for saying that, okay? Most people had no idea just how bullish the Bitcoin spot ETFs event could be. Okay, but now we're watching all of these analysts and all these banks raise their projections for where they think the Bitcoin spot ETFs could go, okay? Now, this is interesting. This is bullish, and it's kind of indicating how the world's perception on Bitcoin is changing. So spot Bitcoin ETFs could see $220 billion of inflows over the next 3 years, says JP Morgan. So this is an article that dropped literally 5 days ago. And it says JP Morgan says Coinbase is well positioned and raised its stock price target to $300 from originally being $220. So again, do you think JP Morgan's bought a lot of Coinbase stock? Potentially, because let's not forget, Jamie Dimon was recently FUDing Bitcoin only weeks ago. Weeks ago, Jamie Dimon was coming out calling on the US government to ban Bitcoin. And now look at the article that's come out. Oh, JP Morgan believes that we could see $220 billion of inflows into Bitcoin. Awfully interesting, also awfully coincidental, the timing of all of these events. And it's all about, connecting these dots that do come out. That kind of makes an interesting story because now all of a sudden, JP Morgan is bullish on Bitcoin. We have a separate JP Morgan analysis suggested that $62 billion could flow in the next year or two. So even the more bearish and the more bullish estimates are still much bigger than the initial estimates that we would see. Okay, so again, the big question is the US Bitcoin spot ETF surprised everyone as they overtook the entire global market for ETFs. What's going to happen to the Hong Kong ETF when that gets approved? I think nobody is really thinking about just how bullish these ETFs could be. I think the only person who is potentially bullish enough on Bitcoin is Samson Mow. Okay, Samson Mow was one of the people who was really beating the drum about how bullish these Bitcoin spot ETFs could be, and we just recently had the pleasure of interviewing Samson Mow and asking him about his thesis for why we could see a $1 million Bitcoin in 2024. So if you haven't seen that one, as you can see, it's on screen right now. Go and check that video out. It was a very bullish interview. Samson always brings the bullishness. And with all that said, if you enjoyed today's live stream, make sure you subscribe for future live streams. We're doing them at least 2 times a week, so stay tuned for that. And we also have an interview dropping tomorrow. So with all that said, hope you guys have a great day, and we will see you in tomorrow's video.